All right, so today we're going to talk about a small group of young, seriously rebellious artists in Victorian England. These guys basically took one look at the art world around them, said, yeah, no thanks, and then went and broke pretty much every rule in the book. They called themselves the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood.
I mean, it's a good question, right? What does happen? Because back in the mid-1800s, this wasn't just some philosophical thought experiment. This was the reality. And that reality sparked a full-blown revolution, a story all about what it takes to challenge the status quo and completely rethink what art is even for. So, let's set the scene. We're in the 1840s. England is chugging along with steam and iron and some pretty rigid social rules. Everything was changing at a dizzying pace. Well, almost everything. The official art world, it felt like it was completely stuck in the mud. And the reason it was stuck was because one single institution was calling all the shots, the Royal Academy. Now, this wasn't just some fancy art school, oh no. The Academy controlled the big exhibitions, they dictated what good taste was, and they basically held the keys to anyone's career as an artist. They were the ultimate gatekeepers. And this really lays out the battle lines. In one corner, you've got the Academy, who loved these dark, murky historical paintings that all kind of looked the same. Our young rebels had a great name for it. They just called it slosh. But in the other corner, you had this electrifying new idea, pushed by the famous critic John Ruskin, truth to nature. In a world filling up with factories, this was a radical call to just look at the world with fresh eyes and paint it with honesty and vibrant color. Okay, so we know what they were against, but what were they for? What did this new vision of truth actually look like in practice? What did the Pre-Raphaelites believe that made their art so incredibly different? Well, their name is a huge clue. They called themselves Pre-Raphaelites because they wanted to rewind the clock, to go back to the art that was made before the superstar of the High Renaissance, Raphael. In their eyes, that early Italian art was pure, it was sincere, it was full of detail, before everything got, a little too polished and artificial for their taste. And this wasn't just some vague idea they talked about. They actually wrote down their manifesto in their own little journal called The Germ. And look at these principles. It's so straightforward, isn't it? Have real ideas, look at nature so you know what you're doing, appreciate honest art, and, just make good stuff. It was a total slap in the face to the stuffy, overly complicated academy. Now, to get that truth to nature look, they had a secret weapon, a little painting hack. They would paint with thin layers of color on top of a white background that was still wet. What this did was make the colors just pop. They were luminous, jewel-like they were glowing from the inside out. It was the absolute opposite of the dark, muddy slosh that they hated so much. Of course, a rebellion needs its rebels, and at the absolute core of this whole movement were three young, ambitious, and just insanely talented artists who got the whole thing started. So let's meet the crew. First, you've got Dante Gabriel Rossetti. He was the poet, the charismatic heart of the group, obsessed with literary scenes and sensuous beauty. Then there's Holman Hunt, kind of the moral compass. He was deeply spiritual, and his work is packed with intense symbolism and that hardcore truth to nature. And finally, you have John Everett Millais. This guy was a flat-out prodigy, a technical wizard who could paint with unbelievable detail, creating some of the most famous art of the era, like his masterpiece, Ophelia. So you've got the radical ideas, the cool new technique, the rock star talent. This should be a smash hit, right? Well, not exactly. What they created wasn't just celebrated, it was straight up scandalous. Seriously. The Victorian public and the critics, they were genuinely horrified. This wasn't the beautiful, idealized art they were used to. It was too bright, too detailed. It was just too real. They'd paint saints and holy figures to look like regular people you'd see on the street, and they'd paint nature with every single blade of grass and every little pebble showing. And the backlash was fierce. I mean, get this. The great Charles Dickens, saw one of Millais's paintings and called it mean, odious, repulsive, and revolting. Wow. When one of the most famous writers on the planet is using words like that, you know for sure you've hit a nerve. So maybe it's not a huge surprise that a group of fiery young artists with such strong personalities didn't stick together for very long. By the mid-1850s, the formal brotherhood was done. But here's the thing. Even though the band broke up, the ideas they put out into the world were just getting started.
You can literally see the ripple effect they had. That first splash they made back in 1848, those ripples directly inspired people like William Morris and the whole arts and crafts movement. And from there, the influence just kept spreading to other movements like symbolism and aestheticism, leaving a mark that you can still see today in everything from fantasy art to modern design. And that legacy is all around us, often in ways we don't even realize. Ever read The Lord of the Rings? J.R.R. Tolkien was a huge fan of their work, and you can feel it in his world building. That whole modern vibe of artisanal, handcrafted interior design, you can trace it right back to their principles. You even see their influence in the look of high-fashion photography and in movies. It's just a classic, timeless story of rebellion. And that kind of brings us right back to where we started. The Pre-Raphaelites went after the art establishment because they thought it had become stale, predictable, and just disconnected from anything real. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the establishment in our world today, whether it's in art or music or something else entirely, that's just waiting for its own rebellion?